Welcome to the Democracy That Delivers podcast from the Center for International Private Enterprise, a podcast series that looks at issues from the intersection between economic development and democracy. I'm Andrew Wilson, CIPE's Executive Director, and today we will be talking about the B5+1, which is a business dialogue platform for the 5 Central Asian countries of Kazakhstan, the Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. And the plus one, well, that's us, the United States. The B+1 dialogue is focused on supporting regional integration and strengthening economic ties among these countries. And CIPE's had a leading role in bringing together the expert voices of the private sector to discuss key issues and recommendations to deepen U.S. business engagement with the region. This includes organizing an upcoming 2-day conference in Kazakhstan with hundreds of stakeholders from business, civil society, and government starting on March 13th, 2024. And here to talk with us today are 2 CIPE colleagues of mine. I'm joined by Eric Hontz, Director of CIPE's Center for Accountable Investment. And I'm also joined by Sabir Kurbanov, who oversees our programs in the Central Asia region. Good afternoon, Sabir. Sabir, I'm going to address the first question to you, and it's more of a backgrounder. Can you tell us a little bit about CIPE's role in putting the B5+1 together? How did this come about? Why did it come about? Who's going to be there? And what are some of the topics that are going to be discussed at the conference?
Thank you, Andrew. It's a pleasure for me to talk a little bit about the background of B5+1 forum and what is going to be achieved during the forum. CIPE is an affiliate of U.S. Chamber of Commerce, came up with the idea of setting up a business dialogue platform which follows the U.S. Chamber model of B20 and B7. And we really tried to propose a similar platform for Central Asia for the first time. We call it B5+1. And
B is for business.
B is for business, exactly. And this is a unique extension of C5+1 diplomatic dialogue platform among the United States and Central Asia. But through this platform, we're really bringing on board private sector and business to inform the government policies towards a more regionally integrated Central Asia, which is stronger together as a common market vis-a-vis external markets and investors. So really, in the New York Declaration last year on the margins of UN General Assembly meeting, the presidents of C5+1 countries committed to establish a business dialogue platform and identified CIPE as a major convener of this platform. This is a great opportunity and honor for CIPE to step in the realm of regional economic integration and helps us to make the best use of our network and strengths in bringing together the business community together. And for the first time, this will be a highly inclusive business dialogue platform in Central Asia, which will bring together, as you mentioned, Andrew, around 250 representatives of private sector from all over Central Asia, including associations, experts, international investors, business chambers, and the government, of course. It is very important to have this conversation with the government to identify the policies and expand really the pie and opportunity for investments and economic integration in Central Asia. The day one of the forum will be devoted to the discussions on the Central Asia policies and towards economic integration and trade promotion, and there will be panels among the experts. Will feature the unique speakers among the experts, business community, and as part of this program, supported by U.S. Department of State on improving the business environment in Central Asia, CIPE facilitated a highly inclusive process of consultations with hundreds of companies and investors in Central Asia, and we've formed 5 subgroups. Task forces on the B5+1 in such sectors as transport, logistics, agribusiness, green energy, tourism, and electronic commerce, which are all highly attractive for international investors in Central Asia. So during the first day, we'll be talking about the issues and priorities, recommendations in these respective sectors, and here the government's responses to those recommendations. And the day 2 of the forum will be really talking about external Central Asia beyond this kind of topics, and we will be engaging speakers among the U.S. investors community, chambers, but also international speakers and companies such as Google, MasterCard and other companies to discuss what they see as policies in Central Asia which needs to be enacted to improve the attractiveness of Central Asia vis-a-vis international investors and bring forward a closer and more integrated Central Asia, which is stronger together than in separate. My own recollection of working
in the region was that there was not a strong tradition of the private sector having a sustained dialogue with their own governments, let alone in a cross-border format, and let alone with the international investment community as well. Is this a fairly new phenomenon in your experience?
I agree, Andrew, that this is the right recollection. Indeed, traditional formats of public-private dialogue in Central Asia is pretty much dominated by the government and select businesses, and they aim towards kind of making the deals, signing some investment deals, but they don't really very inclusive. And we believe that through this format, the benefits will be much larger. We'll be talking less about deals. We'll be talking more about policies that will increase this kind of overall kind of base of investment base.
Eric, you've been running our Center for Accountable Investment, which looks at sort of the models throughout the world. And I think the conditions in Central Asia are such that it's really become sort of, as it sort of traditionally is when we talk about the great game, but also sort of a competition spot, a focal point of where different systems meet up, different strategic goals work themselves through. You've worked with the region in the past. What's going on right now in Central Asia in terms of this sort of history of the region and this competition of investment models? And how can this conference help address some of these issues in the region?
So, Andrew, that's an interesting question, and I will spare you the history lesson of the 1,000 years of the Silk Road and the development. But the region, in its post-Soviet haze or hangover for the past 30 years has come into itself. It is neither part of Russia or part of the Asian world. It is its own unique thing, and it has this millennia of culture and trade and merchants crossing great deserts and taking great risks to make money, to improve themselves, to share ideas, to sell ideas. And there is a recognition, and has been a recognition, from the political top of the pyramid in each of the Central Asian states that there should be further economic integration to create a more cohesive bloc, whether it be ASEAN or deeper EU-type integration with common currencies. Now, all of that is years or decades off. But there are those concrete steps being taken right now by the governments. However, being left out of that dialogue is the push or the pull, I'm not sure which one, of the private sector. So we have perhaps the pull of the government towards greater regional integration and the push of the private sector, which could further enact policies around integration that are very practical, very meaningful, and that will drive growth. So your comment, your question alluded to kind of competing systems, and this is very much a positive sum solution. The governments are looking for economic growth. We have a neighbor to the north that's engaged in a war with Ukraine. We have a neighbor to the east that is suffering its own economic malaise. We have neighbors to the south that are under sanctions. And so we have really a peninsula within Central Asia, within the Eurasian continent, that is seeking some economic integration in order to better its own place, both geopolitically, but also to offer other alternatives for its own goods and services to get them out of Central Asia, because it is, in many cases, double landlocked. And the governments have really been the drivers of this process to this point. What we see on the ground is that there's a big disconnect between what's being mentioned at the top in terms of the presidential administration or the prime minister's office and what's actually being done on the ground. And this conference is an opportunity for the business community to present a bit of reality and offer solutions, or at least a sandbox in which solutions are available. Because the number of reforms, the number of things that need to be done to make the region more economically competitive are voluminous. But where do you begin when you're facing 10,000 potential reforms? This is an opportunity for the business community to come together and say, well, these are our 5 or 7 pinch points, and we think that you, with our assistance in the government, can get these issues resolved in the next year or so. And our long-term goal is that regional integration. Our long-term goal is to sell actively on global markets. And we as a business community can offer you, the government, some constructive options in order to realize that prosperity.
Thanks, Eric. Sabir, I'd like to do a little deeper dive on this kind of concept of regions versus integration and all these things, because these are 5 different countries, and they have 5 very different approaches to governance. They have different economic structures, constructive trade regimes between each other, but they've hardly been conducive to regional trade. And what Eric has just put forward is sort of a vision of a regional economic approach, because they're all fairly small markets. If I'm an international investor and I'm looking at the region, I'm not looking at developing a Tajik market. I might be looking at developing a Central Asian market. But that requires a degree of coordination and reform and other things that these countries have not had a strong track record on in the past. Is there an aspiration here that somehow these countries are going to be able to, I'm going to call it a common market or anything like that, and we've heard references in the past to the Russian-led efforts to do that sort of thing. But what is the goal here? Is the goal just to have a general dialogue to say, all countries need to find their own path to this or that end, or are we trying to say, look, let's be serious here. We've got to get stuff across borders. We've got to move things more quickly. We've got to look at trade regimes and other regulations that may affect that. We have to look at competition between the states in that area as well. And then the second part of this rather long-winded question would be, what's the U.S. goal here? Because this has traditionally been a region of the world where the U.S. plays a very minor role. The role of U.S. investment outside of the energy sector is minuscule if you compare it to the business linkages that these countries might have with China or with Russia or other neighboring areas. And so what's the U.S. role here? What are we bringing to the table that might be different from what their immediate neighbor states bring to the table when they have these kinds of dialogues?
Thank you, Andrew. These are great questions. And you're absolutely right that the region is still pretty small. And in fact, only 1% of global trade is actually a share of Central Asia. And indeed, the Central Asia trades with the outside world more intensively and actively than among themselves, although the trend is increasing, but still, I think, according to national statistics, only around 20% of Central Asia overall trade is regional trade, and it means that the rest of the supply chains are connected to external markets towards China, Middle East, Russia, and maybe less now increasingly to Europe through the Middle Corridor. But still, Central Asia is pretty much a very divergent region in terms of trade regimes, investment regimes, and really, I think the value of this gathering, this forum, is actually first is build trust and partnerships among Central Asians themselves, inclusively with the business, with the governments, with the investment community, and second, to identify and enact a set of very concrete recommendations towards most importantly, harmonization of economic, trade, transport, customs policies, which is probably the great barrier towards building a more integrated and cohesive market, which is absolutely more attractive to international investments and U.S. investments as well, vis-a-vis kind of smaller kind of markets. The currently Central Asian markets are probably dominated by Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan as the largest countries in the region, and the smaller countries, they feel excluded. They're not really benefiting from the flow of investments and trade. So therefore, definitely these specific recommendations, and I could name some of them which we've been contemplated, discussed among our subgroups recently. That includes harmonization of e-commerce legislation, a transit passage for perishable agriculture products, which are a huge competitive advantage of Central Asia, but not reaching international markets because they're hard to trade and transit, and they're just getting spoiled. Creating a common Central Asia tourism zone. The Central Asia is a region with unique tourist opportunities and attractions, but they are not known. And for international tourists, it's very hard to cross the border from one country to another. So we propose some kind of Central Asia Schengen, which would be a huge attraction point for international tourists visiting not only one country but the whole Central Asia. To your second question on the U.S. role and expectations, definitely we shouldn't be kind of naive in expecting that United States would one day become a major international investor in Central Asia. The geographic proximity and other kind of factors are, of course, preventing the United States to be a major investor in Central Asia. But what Central Asia is actually very keen at the moment is in having a more kind of diverse presence of international investors in the region. They see U.S. investments investments not just as a source of money and funding, but as a source of higher standards of doing business, a source of innovations, know-how, knowledge transfer, technology transfer that are very important for Central Asia to be more competitive in the international world. And especially I wanted to stress that the Central Asians wants to see U.S. investments being not just concentrated in a few select sectors such as mining at the moment, mostly in Kazakhstan, but they also want them to be in other sectors, to help diversify Central Asia economy, contribute to more diverse Central Asia. That includes agribusiness, tourism, recreation, electronic commerce. They want to see major e-commerce traders such Amazon and Google to be more widely present in Central Asia to help unlock its connectivity barriers. And definitely the green energy, the critical minerals dialogue is very important. They also bring not just investments, they bring the standards of more environmentally compliant way of doing business in critical minerals, a sector which has also been identified as one of the priority in C5+1 documents.
Sabir, let me just push you a little bit on maybe a broader geopolitical question. And what is the motivation beyond the economic sphere in terms of the political leadership in the region to have a dialogue with the United States?
Yeah, the political leadership in Central Asia wants to see Central Asia stable and secure. Economic security and multivectorism is a big topic in Central Asia. When the whole world is kind of on fire, the Central Asian is seen as a sort of island of stability and security, and it has been repeatedly kind of communicated by the leaders of Central Asia, stability, security, and through multi-vector policy. And I think that is motivation from the region leadership.
Certainly, they've got a lot to balance in the region, I think. Eric, I mean, we've heard a lot here about improving economic integration and resilience to improve the quality of economic investment in a country or a region, and that's pretty central to the work that you're doing at the Center for Accountable Investment. When you hear all of the things that Sabira's kind of put on the table, what sort of outcomes do you think we really should be hoping to achieve, maybe not just at this conference, but perhaps in the longer term through a thing like the B5+1 dialogue?
We really hope that this first forum is found to be useful by all people involved. And that includes civil society organizations within Central Asia, business organizations in Central Asia, and also the governments of Central Asia. There's a big implementation gap from the rhetoric that's being stated at the top levels to the practical implementation. And if anything that we've learned here at CIPE over the years is that businesses are fundamentally practical organizations. They want to get stuff done. And in order to get stuff done, you need to have a plan. And to have that plan, you need to talk to your government and provide them with step-by-step solutions about what you're experiencing, but also a couple of solutions about how to resolve these problems. Keeping in mind that government has its own interests, as Sabir mentioned, with security interests and with stability in the region. How do you balance that with growth? Do you have stability from a top-down government oppression model or supervision? Or do you have it from bottom-up growth and prosperity, where people become richer and more wealthy and want to trade with each other, and that brings about stability? Two fundamentally different models, as you mentioned at the top, of viewing the world. Sabir also mentioned trust, and trust is a fundamental prerequisite. We have 5 different Central Asian states with their own unique political economies, with their own unique histories, and having trust outside of just the governments, but among the business community, is really fundamentally important in order to establish those market principles and those democratic principles of doing business across borders with each other. We need to trust that your payment will get to your counterpart across the border. You need to understand that there's going to be a slight delay at the border, but it's going to be communicated to you well in advance by your business partner because of XYZ issue being experienced by that government. It's about moving from a zero-sum mindset in the region to a positive-sum mindset. So we need to have the business community, which already sees this, and it's evidenced by the massive increase in investment across regions within Central Asia, from zero-sum to positive-sum, where these businesses are showing the governments the way in a bit, that if I'm making more money in Bishkek, I'm going to be reinvesting that money back in Shymkent. And if I'm doing well in Shymkent, then I'm going to invest in Dushanbe as well, because I want to expand my operations in Tajikistan. So trying to do the traditional thing where you have this business conference and you sign some big deals is a very top-down way of doing things. We want to show that there's a different way of growth from the bottom up, where you are including all of your local businesses they're already thriving. They're already trying to grow. That's what businesses do. And they're running into these barriers. So would that there were a government that says it's already willing to implement this regional economic integration plan. Here are the solutions. And we're laying out solutions. It's a constructive approach where everyone can win. And lastly, you asked about the U.S. as a convener to Sabir, or U.S. as a role. And I think here the U.S. has the convener role. It's not going to be the biggest investor in all sectors throughout Central Asia, but it does have a role to play. And business is constantly evaluating risk. And quite frankly, Central Asia is a faraway place that is unknown to many businesses. Now, are you going to put all of your eggs in a basket with your investment? No. You're going to look for business partners. You're going to look for joint venture opportunities. You're going to, it's a fixed asset, you're going to look at investing in mezzanine debt or fixed debt based on your risk appetite. And you're going to look for partners when you're talking about finance from the West or from the East, from Tokyo or Seoul, to go in with you into Central Asia to diversify that risk within your portfolio. And here, I think that the U.S. has a really key role to play in its relationships with the IFIs, the DFC as well, but also with private sector actors in the West that are looking for opportunities to build and to grow.
Thank you, Eric. I think the point that you make here is that the private sector with its sort of feet on the ground and a very practical viewpoint has a lot to bring to the table in terms of practical solutions, and really, I think is the right engine to drive economics is the right engine to drive integration within the region beyond sort of geopolitical pressures that leadership may face. And it's also brings wealth and prosperity. As we like to say here, it helps democracy deliver ultimately when people can see concrete outcomes to their efforts to move an issue forward. I want to thank Sabir, I want to thank you, and I want to thank you, Eric, again, for joining me today in this discussion, and wish you both the best of luck with the B5+1 meeting now, and also hopefully that we'll have more things to talk about after the conference and perhaps into the future. And I want to thank you for listening to the Democracy That Delivers podcast. For more information about the B5+1, please visit CIPE.org. Thank you.